Pasuk days. Okay, the Torah tells us, if in your midst a prophet or a seer should arise, and to prove that he's a prophet, he performs a sign or a mofes, a miracle. Meaning he forecasts something's going to happen, something supernatural, and it happens. And what he forecasted, the prophet, it comes to fruition. And he tells you, he says, let us go and serve false gods that you don't know, you're not aware of. V'novdei, we should serve them. Lo sishmal divrei hanovi ahu. You should not listen to the words of this novi, or acholem acholom ahu, ki menas Hashem elokechem eschem. Because God is testing you. Lo das hayishchem ovim es Hashem elokechem chol vavchem nafshem. He's testing you to see whether you love him with all your souls and all your hearts and all your souls. So seemingly, before we speak about this Navi, this false prophet, despite the fact that he performed a real miracle and he forecasted that it's going to happen and it happens, God is testing you to see whether you love him with all your heart and with all your soul. Seemingly, if you don't, if it's not fully integrated, this test is nearly impossible to withstand. You know, we speak about in time of Achov, they were the Via Baal, the prophets of the Baal, the Sur Elio Bar Carmel, where he proved them to be false prophets. Unless you're able to internalize the love of Hashem, it says, to what degree do you have to love God to be able to withstand this test? You have to love him. If it's anything less than that, you're not going to be able to survive this test. But that's the test. This is a test of fire. First, I'd like to discuss how exactly is this man trying to prove that he's a true prophet. The Rambam rules that a prophet, to be proven a prophet, has to first perform a supernatural act, which is what we'll call a nes, and he has to forecast the future. And if it happens, he's established as a Novi Emes, he's a true prophet. If it doesn't happen, then he's a false prophet. He didn't prophesize. He's a false prophet. However, if he forecasts something negative, tragedy is going to happen, and it doesn't happen, there's no indication he's a false prophet. Why? Because when we speak about punishment, there's always midas harachmim that could intervene, which will not allow it to take place. But if it's something positive, the prophet says, regardless of whether deserving or not, nothing will stop it from happening. So if it doesn't happen, what's positive is a confirmation he's a false prophet. He's not the real prophet. But over here, this person, all the criteria to establish himself as a true prophet, he met that criteria, and then he tells you to serve false gods. The Torah says he's a false prophet. He's a false prophet. Of course, it's not possible. We're going to explain in a moment. Now, there's a Sefarno that explains regarding Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu was told by Hashem to take a son and bring him up as a burnt offering. Now, who heard that prophecy? Until Sinai, how do we know that a God even communicates with people? Maybe he doesn't. The only one who knows that is the prophet himself, because the prophet receives the prophecy. But when he communicates that prophecy to anyone else, How do they know that he's a prophet? So the only way they can know he's a prophet is only because, based on their evaluation of what he says and what they see, it seems to be he is the real thing. But factually, unquestionably, they don't know whether he's a prophet. They're surmising he's a prophet. He probably is a prophet. But they know with absoluteness that he's a prophet, they don't know. They don't know. But yet, when Avram Avinu says to Yitzchak, I was told by Hashem to bring you up as a burnt offering, Yitzchak believed his father. Because his father had credibility based on his relation with his father, that's what Hashem had said to him. That God communicated with him that he should be brought as a burnt offering. That was his level of belief in his father. That's how credible his father was in his eyes. But not, was it, if he did not believe that, it could be questioned. A third party would say, how do you know your father's a prophet? Well, he performed a miracle. Therefore what? In Egypt, when Moshe came and performed miracles to prove that he's God's agent, they said it's witchcraft, it's sorcery. So any prophet, you could always question the veracity of his credibility, because maybe it's sorcery. Maybe he's deceiving, he's misleading people. Only at Sinai, where every Jew openly prophesies, God spoke to every Jew at Sinai. So firstly, it's been established, God communicates with people. To every Jew at Sinai. In addition, the Rambam says, at Sinai, every Jew heard Hashem say to Moshe Rabbeinu, Lechem or hem kach v'kach. Tell every one of them this and this. So that every Jew at Sinai openly witnessed and prophesied and heard God saying to Moshe, you will tell them. Tell them such and such. So God established Moshe as the prophet before Klal Yisrael, before the Jewish people, that he is God's spokesman. So therefore, anything in the future now, his word, when he says the name of Hashem, he's God's spokesman. That's the reason why Moshe's prophecy is uncontestable. Because since it was factual, and as the Ramchal writes, Nevuos goes beyond factual. Anything we see, you could say maybe it's an optical illusion. Maybe we perceived it that way. Maybe we're deluding ourselves. Prophecy is a level of clarity. There's nothing in existence which is as absolute as prophecy. Why? So the Ramchal explains, whenever we process anything in life, it's with our intellect, with our brain. The brain itself, because of biases and various misunderstandings, we have our own colored glasses or jaundiced eye that we process it that with. Therefore, as much as he says it's accurate, it may not be accurate. When a Navi prophesizes, God communicates directly to the neshama. It's unrelated to his physicality. It's directly to the soul. And therefore, that experience, that level of clarity, its absoluteness, there's nothing, the Ramchal writes, it's more than a person seeing his friend that he knew his whole life. It goes beyond that. We can't even relate to the level of absoluteness of what that experience is. The Ramchal writes, could you imagine a person having 10 million volts going through his body? You understand? The person would be incinerated in a moment. There'd be nothing left of the person. The Shekhinah coming upon, the divine presence coming upon the prophet to connect with his neshama, physically, humanly, you cannot survive that experience. Impossible. Every Navi should die. And that's the reason why every Nevuah, every Navi, before he starts prophesying, he starts convulsing, like he's having an epileptic fit, and then he falls to the ground, he's unconscious, and then he prophesizes in that unconscious state, and he says, the Ramchal, for the prophet to survive that, he has to be on life support. Hashem has to will that he should live, because humanly, it's impossible to survive that experience. But again, the prophet, his level of clarity is absolute because it goes through the neshama. It's not, has nothing to do with the physicality of the person. That's the prophet. We at Sinai, we witnessed that, how Hashem had spoken to Moshe, tell them to say such and such. Moshe's prophecy is not based on or proven through the miracles he performed. He split the sea, he gave us man, we had the bear, the wellspring of Miriam, all that, because that could always be questioned. Why? Because somebody could say, maybe Moshe Rabbeinu was a greater mechashev than the Egyptians. He was even able to pull the wool over the eyes of the Egyptians. Therefore, that would not be sufficient to establish the eternity of the truth of Torah. The only way it could be established, we had to witness it ourselves, to hear directly from Hashem that Moshe is his spokesman. I'm just quoting, these are the words between the Ramchal and the Rambam. That is the reality of why, and we have in the Ami Mamins, one of the tenets of Jewish faith is firstly God, that the words of the prophets are true. That's firstly. That means Hashem communicates with mankind, whoever that prophet may be. In addition, Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest prophet who ever lived, greater than those who preceded him and those who will follow him. Again, why? Because what is the basis? Until Moshe, every prophet was only a prophet, only he knew he was the prophet. How do we know now that there is prophecy? Because Moshe Rabbeinu set the criteria, what prophets are. How do we know when a prophet performs a miracle and then he forecasts the future and it happens? How do we know that confirms him as a prophet? Because Moshe Rabbeinu said it. Because Moshe Rabbeinu, being God's spokesman, he set that fact in place. But without that, we don't know. Because until that, everything's purely surmising that he is based on our evaluation of that person. But once there was Sinai and we saw Moshe Rabbeinu was chosen to be Hashem's spokesman, he set the criteria of what a prophet is. That now becomes the reality. Okay? So now we speak. A prophet comes and he meets the criteria, the prerequisites of a prophet. And all of a sudden he tells you, go worship idolatry, false gods. Moshe Rabbeinu says in the name of Hashem, he's a false prophet. But he split the sea. He forecasted the future. It's irrelevant. So what does the Navi Sheker say? The Navi say, maybe I am the true prophet, Moshe is the false prophet. Moshe can't be the false prophet because the basis for you being even considered as a prophet is the criteria that Moshe set in place because he's God's spokesman. Therefore, or otherwise we wouldn't even pay attention to you. So why do you have any validity? Only because of the criteria that Moshe set in place, which we know he is God's spokesman. Therefore, it's confirmed you're the false prophet, and therefore he deserves to be put to death for that reason.